Melody here. You might know me as ApplePie Movement. I am a humanitarian sharing the conversations with humanity which need to be heard. In today's conversation with my cousin RandTucker, we discuss how he has used his platform of being the founding and senior pastor of Hyde Park Vineyard over the last 25 years to create social justice within Chicago. So come on, grab a piece of pie and join our conversation.
Hey, Melody, it's great to be with you.
Hi. So our family, our uncle, I think it's our great-great-uncle, Paul Bilheimer and Jenny Bilheimer, they wrote Destined for the Throne, which was the first love offering of Jan and Paul Crouch. So I was just wondering, were you inspired to start your ministry because of our family or a granddad who was also a pastor? Or what inspired you to start this church?
You know, really, it was a long personal journey. I definitely think that having both my grandfathers as pastors had a huge influence. But it's interesting growing up in a family where my mom was a devout Christian and my dad became an atheist. They had two completely opposite reactions to having kind of a family line of ministry. Really, when I was 18, that I had a personal encounter with God that changed everything for me. So I definitely think that my heritage played into that kind of journey. The Bilheimers, obviously our family, the Eddies, the Tuckers, the different things. But it was partly my own personal journey as well.
And why did you decide to move to Chicago and start a ministry out there instead of somewhere in Orange County?
Well, if you had asked my mom, she would say because she always wanted me to marry a good Midwestern girl. You know how Aunt Sharon is for you.
Right.
Yeah, you know, I think that since I had already started traveling and doing some ministry, that kind of opened me up to considering moving to some place like Chicago for a brief period of time. I thought I would come out here for 3 years while I was in seminary, try something different, maybe live in the inner city, serve in a different context. I didn't really envision staying here, but here I am 25 years later.
And starting in that specific location has led to some interesting events. You had the opportunity of meeting Michelle Obama. How did that unfold, and what was that experience like?
Well, when I moved to Hyde Park, I wanted to meet the community leaders, not so much the church leaders. They probably already connected. I wanted to find out who are the people in this community that I should get to know. So I started asking around and developed a very short list of everybody I should meet. And Michelle Obama, not Barack Obama, was on that list. He wasn't yet a senator. And I had heard that she had grown up here on the South Side and she was working at the University of Chicago. So I booked an appointment and went to meet with her. She was very friendly, but she was also very passionate. She had grown up just a couple of miles south of the University of Chicago, was a top-notch student, obviously went on to get a great education. She was never recruited by the University of Chicago. And she came back with a passion to be a bridge between the university and the community. And I could see that was so evident. And I look back at that as one of my most fond memories of the early days when I was just getting ready to plant the church.
And why was it imperative to you to meet with community leaders?
You know, oftentimes the church is connected to itself, like one church knows another church, and partnering together, there's a great functionality in knowing the other pastors in the community. But that often comes easier than getting to know other community leaders. I wanted to find out who's planning the local events, who's, investing in local business, who's part of the fabric of the community of Hyde Park, regardless of their faith or affiliation. And I really enjoyed doing that and a great foundation to know the history of the community, but also to get involved in it in ways outside of our church.
Why is it important to you to be involved with works outside of religious work? Is it because of your interest in social justice and wanting to help humanity as a whole?
Oh, yeah, it's a huge part of it. Yes. Our focus on justice and mercy has been a big part of our vision as a church. We want to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. We want to provide for those in need. And our partnerships in that can cross outside the church. We have common values that we share with a lot of other people, so we can partner together in that. But I think it also had to do with kind of wanting to get to know what people are doing in the community and what particular niche like we could start serving in, maybe where there was a gap. For example, I found out kind of early on that there weren't a lot of community events at that time. I got involved with a couple of them that were going on, but I grew up with opportunities to go to all sorts of things, the local Easter egg hunt or a harvest fest in the fall. And I found out that not a lot of those things happening in our neighborhood at the time. So I thought this is a great opportunity for us, the church, to host some events. And early on, when we would host events, maybe 10% or 15, 20% of the people there were from our church. These were real community events. We just wanted to bless people and show God's love in a tangible way.
That's really a beautiful sentiment of what you've set out to establish. Now that you've been in ministry for over 25 years, and growing up from Orange County and coming from a very privileged background, and in contrast to now living in Chicago and working with people of all sorts of different backgrounds, would you say that we are facing as a society an issue of classism or racism, or what are the injustices, the root of the injustices that we are trying to solve now as humanitarians?
It would take us hours to talk about that. I know you're passionate about it. I'm passionate about those things. Growing up in a privileged community in Southern California, mostly Caucasian, I was so isolated from both the history of what's happened in this country and around the world, but also sheltered from the consequences of that. And the unfolding drama that's still taking place and the suffering that people are going through. It's really in college that I became aware of that, when I was at UC San Diego. And I started taking a lot of classes in ethnic studies and understanding the sociology and history of racial tension, classism, all kinds of different things. So when I came to Chicago, an African-American pastor offered me to do an internship in the inner city. I also joined the Association of Believers for Black America at my seminary. And so I was hearing things while I was studying scripture and theology about how fellow brothers and sisters viewed scripture, the world around us. But I was also living in the inner city, directing a men's halfway house for men who came out of prison and off the street. And it was a really multi-ethnic group of people that I was living with. And so both kind of in terms of my headspace, but also my heart, as I lived it out, I started to see kind of what people were going through and where things were at. When I moved from the neighborhood I was in, directing the halfway house, down to Hyde Park, I moved from a very low income neighborhood where I was a minority to a more kind of socially diverse neighborhood that was ethnically and economically diverse. Our church is on the same street as Barack and Michelle Obama's house. They just live 2 blocks down, or they don't live there anymore, but they still have their house there. And, other leaders like Jesse Jackson, Arnie Duncan, lots of people at the University of Chicago, they live in this neighborhood. And it's an interesting neighborhood, mix of upper income, lower income, families living just blocks apart from each other. And when you get outside of Hyde Park, where we're at, you're in some of the neighborhoods that have traditionally been socially oppressed by racism and classism, but they still are ravaged right now by violence. Just a couple miles from where I'm sitting right now, there's been many shootings over the weekend. even here on Memorial Day weekend. It's one of the most violent weekends in recent history here in Chicago. So we're constantly grappling with these issues as a church. We're also wrestling through them with our justice team. So our justice team, we like read, wrestle, talk, go through things, lament when we lose somebody like Ahmaud Arbery, and talk about what we could do, take initiative, do different things. So so it's a totally different world. And I think college became the first step to stepping into involving myself in the city life, educating myself more in what was going on. And in some ways, I developed a heart for Chicago and felt like I couldn't go back to my old life. I couldn't go back to, what I knew before. Even though I was thinking at one point about planting a church in the heart of San Francisco or in the heart of San Diego. Those were some of my early dreams when I was heading out into ministry. But being here in Chicago, I felt like a burden that I was supposed to stay. And like I said, 25 years later, it's just amazing that I'm still here.
And do you think that you couldn't go back to the lifestyle that you were raised in? You couldn't go back to California because you were raised in that sheltered environment with white privilege, with maybe a classist environment where you had so many opportunities for enrichment and growth that aren't being provided to people in Chicago? I mean, is it really an issue of white privilege, or is it an issue of classism, that if you were born to an upper middle class family, regardless of their race, you have more opportunities for enrichment and growth opposed to people born into poverty? The violence that happened recently over this weekend, is that due to people being born into poverty, or is that really due to racism in your community?
Question raises like a great point, and I think you've illustrated how the two interact already. I think it's both. It's a both and depending on where you're at in the country, in the world, those things overlay each other. So, in Chicago, you see how racism, prejudice mixed with power, has created poverty lines.
Thank you, everyone, for joining another ApplePie Table Talk, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.
Bye. Bye, Melody.
Bye, Rand. Thank you.